It's Wizards versus Lesbians, a podcast for your ears. Hello and welcome to Wizards versus Lesbians. My name is Isaac.
I'm Alexis.
And today we're discussing Someone You Can Build a Nest In by John Wiswell. Would you like to do the plot or shall I?
I will do the plot. First, I do want to say, full disclosure, the author is agent siblings with my soon-to-be wife. So, this is not actually going to make me be any nicer to the book, but I still feel like, for podcasting ethics, I should mention this.
Podcasting ethics, there's almost nothing more important in this world. So.
All right, so, Someone You Can Build a Nest In. The plot. Shishishin is a horrible man-eating, blobby, shape-shifting, boneless monster who is living an idyllic life out in a sort of generic fantasy countryside with her bright blue pet bear and the occasional diet of humans, mostly bandits, and with only two things wrong in her life. One is that occasionally adventurers come to kill her, and two is that she is sad and lonely, and she wants the idealized vision she has of a mate based on her father, which is someone she can lay her eggs in so that they will devour themselves, so that they will hatch and feed on the body of the mate to nurture themselves, because to Shishishen's mind, this is the ultimate act of love. And then when fleeing from another round of adventurers, she runs into the woman who might just be the titular someone she can build a nest in. But, families intervene.
Yeah, that's perfectly well expressed. Are there lesbians in this book?
Yeah, I mean, basically.
Yeah, basically.
There's an asexual romance between two people between two beings who use she, her pronouns. I'm calling it lesbian.
Yeah, no, this totally counts. And wizards?
Well, there's horrible shape-shifting monsters who are less sympathetic and evil.
Yes, I mean, it's really more of a bad mom Wizards versus Lesbians book.
Yeah, this is more of a bad mom-style wizard as opposed to a bad dad-style wizard, but still.
Yes. Well, I think that the themes are certainly close enough
yes.
that I'm happy to call this one Wiz-Les.
Especially under the more expansive definition that we've been forced to adopt because we were running out of strictly classical Wiz-Les microgenre books.
And this is definitely a narcissistic parents of monstrous children book. No question about it. And that's fine.
Yes.
We soldier on. Why should you read this book?
It's really charming. It's got a lot of really funny bits. It argues that the best way to deal with your abusive family is to just murder all of them, which I can't necessarily endorse morally, but boy, do I find sympathetic. And yeah. So, I had many pet peeves about this book, which I will cheerfully elaborate on, but I nonetheless found myself utterly charmed by it.
Excellent. Yeah, no, I would say I agree. And I found that I really did enjoy the sort of both the moral and political content, murder notwithstanding. Why shouldn't you read this book?
Well, it does like 80% of the really annoying things that sort of the contemporary cozy genre does, like sticking in a lot of random contemporary labels for things like gender and sexuality in a way that does not feel organically integrated into the world in any way. I think it actually kind of flubs the monster reveal and like the ultimate villain. And it drags in places. We don't necessarily always need to know the exact details of how Shishishan is using these bones to make herself look more human at any given moment. So those are my main complaints, I would say. It's kind of slow. It's occasionally deeply annoying. There's some things that were not very well thought through.
I agree with those criticisms. Although the pacing is a little bit wonky, it is also very short.
Right.
So it's even if there are places where nothing of any particular interest is happening, it does move along at a relatively decent pace because there's just, there isn't that much book to get through.
I feel like honestly, this could have been a really amazing novella as opposed to a pretty good novel.
It does feel a bit padded in places, yes. Although I will say that I will go to bat for the epilogue, even though it seems,
as it were.
Yeah, even though it is absolutely I'm doing this wrong on purpose kind of a structural thing.
Yeah, no, the epilogue didn't bother me, honestly. The epilogue I thought was indeed charming.
Yes.
But basically, if the contemporary sort of cozy based on vibes, not actually based on content of, a lot of the fantasy of this moment bothers you, then this book will probably deeply annoy you.
I
if
suppose
you're willing, if you're willing to overlook that at all, then if you're going to forgive a book that does this stuff, it'll be this one, I think. But
I mean that was counterbalanced to me by all of the murdering.
But the thing is that a lot of the contemporary cozy based on vibes stuff is full of murder. I have an entire thing ready to complain about post-spoiler zone.
We should definitely discuss this. Yeah, we'll definitely discuss this after the spoiler zone because I'm looking forward to hearing your rant. And this is like, I mean, I guess like I understood very quickly that this is 100% wish fulfillment. It's like this is not meant to be. I didn't even like think of it as like meaning to be a coherent universe. I'm like, okay, so that stuff didn't bother me particularly because I didn't expect anything from it. But I also don't have the same kind of, because you in the classic, U.S. Marine kneeling before the child's bed style, protect me from an enormous amount of crap that doesn't get to me.
Oh God, I read so much of that crap. Yes.
I don't have that allergy because I haven't been exposed to as much of it as you do.
Despite the Christian imagery in that meme, I will accept the comparison.
Thank you. So, content warnings.
Body horror out the wazoo.
It's
fairly realistically, not subtly, but fairly realistic depictions of emotional abuse. They weren't subtle, and this is actually a thing that I did like about the book is that, while they weren't necessarily well written, I did feel like they actually hit the appropriate tone of it really nails the exact tone of a specific kind of abusive mother. In a way that most people either shy away from or just can't quite get. So
yeah, it had a ring of truth to it, even though, as you say, it was extremely on the nose. And let's see here. It is one of those where it's like justifiable murder can actually be healthy books. So if you mind that. Animal abuse. I should mention the animal abuse.
That's true.
Pretty bad animal abuse, and some like stuff about. Oh, this is another monstrous parent or narcissistic parents of monstrous children books, by the way.
Yes.
Twice over.
Oh yeah.
And
twice
so there's
over.
there's stuff about like the difficulty of raising a nonverbal child without being abusive and that kind of thing. So. And I'm sure we'll think of something else. But
yes.
For the time being, let's head off to the spoiler zone.
Yes. Oh, I will actually say another reason why you should read this book is everybody's favorite minor side character, the kinky guy.
yeah.
But I just like, okay. So post spoiler zone.
Spoiler zone now.
Here's the thing about the reason why I like the kinky guy thing is that you get to this point where she's like terrified him into cleaning up her horrible fetid lair and to make it nice for her date, and he does this, And you think, why doesn't he, why is he just agreeing to do this instead of going and calling the monster hunters? And then it's made explicit, oh, he's getting off on this, which it was a very well handled, this seems like poor characterization. Oh, no, this actually completely does make sense in the context of this one weird guy.
Yeah, it was funny. I mean, and like, it is one of those things where it is like, okay, this joke is sort of partially here to plaster over a plot hole.
But it was a sufficiently funny one that I totally forgave it. So
yes. Speaking of which, and this maybe should have gone in the why you shouldn't read this book. There are a few plot holes. The chronology of the book as it's presented doesn't really make any sense.
No.
There's like time for an actual tree to grow in a hole through a hole in the roof that is like only 10 years old. There's a bunch like there. If you view this as like a mystery that's being solved, it's not at all satisfying on that level. It's definitely more satisfying on an emotional level.
Yes.
But again, that didn't really bother me because I thought that the funny parts were very good.
It's funny.
Yeah, the jokes in this are generally pretty good jokes.
Yeah, and there's some good slapstick moments too.
Yes, I think the bit where Shishishin brings Homily to hunt the monster in quotes, and she's what has she done? She's like glued something to a sheep or something,
right?
And been like, it's a long way off, so she won't notice.
Right.
This person who's been like researching monsters.
Yes, this person who's like a second generation professional monster hunter.
Yeah, I thought that was a very funny bit, basically on all fronts.
Yeah.
And let's talk about the coziness aspect of it.
Okay, so great, because this book actually helped me realize, because I was like, okay, it both shows some of the things that I hate and also manages to charm me nonetheless. So I was like, okay, what is it? And this has helped me narrow down what it is I hate about like the contemporary idea of the cozy genre. Which cozy is actually a terrible word for it because these books are full of murder often. Usually they are. This one is somewhat unusual in that the murder happens to named characters that we have some reason to feel some, at least some modicum of empathy for. And so, and so that is, again, one of the things that this book does well that the others don't, which is usually because a lot of the sort of contemporary cozy vibe stuff is, horrible violence to anybody who doesn't matter and no real consequences to anybody who does.
Yes.
But the thing that this book does, but the thing is that the thing that makes it cozy is that nothing about it is supposed to ever really challenge you in any way emotionally. So, right. And a lot of this means using contemporary labels and stuff. Like there's a line about, every allosexual virgin. And from the point of view of the person speaking, even if allosexual was a label that existed in this generic fantasy world, which nothing else in the text gives us any indication that it would be, including the fact that, like, Homily's asexuality doesn't seem to have a label, and she's trying to, figure out, she's trying to, like, dance around it and figure out if she can have a relationship with this person or not, based on her asexuality, and yet somebody else is using allosexual just simply because you can't have, an unproblematic book where they say virgin, but there's any assumption that, asexuals don't count.
Yes, I get what you're saying.
Right? And similarly, everybody talks in therapy speak. Like all the good guys. The good guys always, they talk things out, they say the right thing, they never say anything that could be like screen capped and, retweeted or reblogged as something problematic. They're either confused or not. And sometimes they might lose their temper. But, they never say anything that indicates that they have actual problematic beliefs.
Don't you just hate it when your blorbo turns out to be a milkshake duck? Now, I have definitely gotten whiffs of this vibe in previous books that we've done. And I've certainly, and I've complained about it in the past, where there's like, where it seems like it's still, this was a problem that I had with the Chuck Tingle book. Right. For an example, it does this. Now, and I was thinking, and I had this exact same thought going into this book. I was like, why does this blob monster know all this therapy speak? You
Right,
know,
exactly.
why is this blob monster? And then I was like, and then something clicked for me, and I was like, oh, the joke is that the monster is using all this therapy speak to talk about the nurturing, non-problematic, caring two-way relationship that she needs to have with somebody she's going to lay her eggs in,
And yes,
have
and
them
eat,
devoured,
and have her offspring
like,
devour them. Yes,
that is actually
right.
hilarious.
And see, that's one of the reasons why this book mostly works, is that it, a lot of it really leans into the incongruity of the horrible, man-eating monster. Using all the therapy speak. The problem is that everyone else also uses all the therapy speak, which makes it less funny.
That is true.
That just becomes
also,
that's how you can tell a good guy from a bad guy, is they talk like, they've read all the right self-help books and gotten the right amount of DBT. Not enough that they can't that they don't need to continue to process their trauma at each other, but don't worry, they can process each other's trauma using therapy speak.
So, I mean, this is like, I'm gonna do a sort of a going to bat for the book here. I agree, first of all, and it's like this conceit works a lot less well after Shishishin no longer wants to lay eggs in Homily.
Right. Yes.
It gets considerably more tiresome after that point, and I think that the second half of the book doesn't work as well as the first half of the book for that reason.
That's one of the many reasons I think the second half doesn't work as well as the first. But
yes, but I think that part of it is that Shishishin's way, you can justify it to a certain extent. It's like we've set it up that Shishishin talks in this knows all of the right words, and that's funny, because she's also a man-eating monster who lays eggs in people.
Or who would, if she could ever find the right person.
And this actually, and the thematic thing continues to work, this is one of the reasons that I really like the epilogue. Is like, I think that Shishishin is actually, that this portrait of Shishishin is actually quite good, in that it's a portrait of somebody who knows all the right language and has gotten 80% of her shit worked out. But there are some real problematic things at the base of that have gone completely untouched, right?
That's fair. And actually, one of the reasons why the epilogue did really work for me is that the epilogue showed that there were going to still be some lingering problems. And one of them being that she dumps her problem child into her girlfriend's lap and then is like, all right, off to hibernate.
Well, no, I mean, it's not just that. It's that she's like, okay, I have successfully identified what Homily's problem is. I've done the psychoanalysis thing. I've seen what her, I've seen what her thing is. I've seen how that relates to my trauma. Now, I'm not ever going to let anybody hurt her again. And okay, so that means that it's absolutely okay for me to kill my own child.
Yes.
It's
and Homily is the one who has to be like, no, we are trying to be better than our horrible parents. We are not going to murder the child. We are going to teach the child not to hurt us, and minimize the child's ability to hurt us, and still give the child a loving home.
Right, exactly. It's
and a dumb name.
The point, yes.
but the point, honestly, I found the dumb name charming, because she's like, I am adopting you, random monster child, and thus naming you in my family tradition.
Yeah, I actually found the family naming tradition to be a charming little joke.
Yes.
Every member of this family is named after a sort of a literary conceit.
Hence, Homily.
Yeah, Homily, and the kid eventually is named Epilogue during the epilogue. And which, too cute for some, that's fine, horses for courses. Yeah. But it's like, it really drives home the fact that, even though Shishishin has, made her way, understands a lot of things really clearly, and then over the course of the story understands a couple of more things very clearly, she's still absolutely going to stop after every revelation and be like, I know the whole truth now, and I'm going to commit violence on the basis of the whole truth that I understand.
Yeah,
And that
that's
keeps
fair.
happening.
You're right.
You know?
Actually, you know what? You're right. That works well with that's a very convincing analysis of the story, and perhaps I'm not giving the author quite enough credit. Because you're right. Like, Shishishen continues to make, even as she says all the right therapy speak stuff, she continues to be like, I've had what is clearly the final revelation, and I no longer need to learn the truth. I can now murder. Now, finally, all my murdering will be morally justified.
Exactly. This feels to me like it's a gentle satire on this kind of genre, but I think it is satirical.
I'm willing to buy that. I think the satire is more successful in the first half of the book, and near the end. I don't think that it works as well during the meat of the second half.
And I agree with you, and I think that the problem with that is that it kind of shies away from something that should have happened.
Mm-hmm.
They should have had to have a conversation where they're very much in love with each other, and Shushishin is like, yes, okay, now it's time for me to lay my eggs in you.
Right.
You know?
Yes. Yeah. And this is part of what I mean.
The fact they didn't have that is like kind of cowardly.
Right. Well, and this is part of what I mean again with my problems with the genre is that there's never. It shies away from anything that could be too embarrassing or that could be problematic. It shies away from ever making you go, from ever making you really, from making it hurt to identify with the viewpoint character of the love interest.
Yes.
There's never any point where you go, even Shishishen, because the violence is sort of cartoony and funny and most of the people that she eats on screen deserve it, or at least, seem to, it makes it harder to, or makes it easier to sort of forgive that and see her as somebody that, to not have to struggle to understand the character in any way. And that is that is unchallenging in a way that I think is a bad thing for the genre as a whole. And I think that this one does a lot better, partly because it's having so much fun with Shishishen's monstrousness. But even still, there's, there's these crucial moments where the narrative seems to flinch away from ever having to make things too hard.
Yeah, there are bits and pieces that, like, for example, like the whole thing where Shishishin is reminiscing about her past, and it's like, after she grew up enough to like think about what she was doing, that she like went to all these pains to, only eat bad people. Mm-hmm. I would have liked for her to have to think about that a little bit more.
Yeah, what's actually a bad person?
Right. I would have liked, I would have liked her to have a reckoning about that, which I think is probably more likely to happen. If we look at it from an in-universe perspective, that would be unlikely to happen within the scope of this narrative, because she is, again, very, very slow to let her, comforting lies go.
Yeah.
In
particular, all the bad people she eats are bandits, how do you get bandits? Well, when you have an unjust feudal system, banditry is one of the survival tactics that people turn to. And it doesn't mean that it's good, but we've established that this is taking place in an unjust feudal system, and yet it is entirely unproblematic to eat bandits. Because,
Indeed.
Bandits are bad. I did enjoy... So, there's also a lot of times where stuff is funny but doesn't really go anywhere. Like, part of the reason why I liked the joke with the kinky guy is that he keeps showing up because, now that he has learned this thing about himself, he's going to keep putting himself in the orbit of the monster so that she can order him around and, graphically threaten to disembowel him and he can get off. But, for example, the random 3 bandits who name themselves what is, kleptocracy and autocracy or whatever. Yeah. That didn't really go anywhere. And so it felt like either... For clever's sake. Right. And the thing is that it could have either gone somewhere, in which case great, or it should have been cut. Because all it did was slow down the plot.
Yes, I agree. I mean, that did seem like just a way to get to the next thing more than anything
Right,
else.
And it turns out that actually, if you want to get to the next thing, you just go, when they reach the castle, or whatever.
Indeed. So let's talk about Homilly's being ace for a moment. So on the one level, that is a horrible waste to have a girlfriend who is literally a tentacle monster and be ace.
Except that, the tentacle monster is also ace, so
yes,
good thing it worked out for them.
It's just a shame, but I will say that there is this.
If you want a Wislos book with tentacle sex, I can put one on the list. I've got one on the lineup.
I mean, I'm not so horny that I want to read a bad book just because it has tentacle sex.
I might stick it in anyway, honestly.
But regardless, like, I think that, there is an extremely, like, both hilarious and potent moment in this book, right? First of all, one of the best jokes is that, she thinks, oh, my heart is leaping, and it's in fact her egg sac,
right,
which is mistaken for her heart.
Yes.
That is leaping and trying to literally force itself out of her so it can embed in this other person. Which is, like,
yes,
really funny.
Yeah, that was a great joke.
Yes, but it leads to this to this incredible moment where, like, what do you do as the ultimate act of revenge against your overbearing, abusive mother who wants to follow, but the immortality metaphor is basically, you better make a bunch of babies so that I can continue to live vicariously through this. It's like, what am I going to do? I'm going to fill my uterus with poison and make you eat it.
Yes.
It's, first of all, it's incredibly trans.
Yes, in a sort of ultimate body autonomy way when it comes to controlling your child's reproduction. Exactly.
It's like it's sort of its transness as a sort of politically reactive, force. In this instance, it does make this, not the story as a whole, come off as quite sex negative. To the point where,
well, that's why we have the sympathetic kinky guy.
I suppose that's true. I mean, is he sympathetic or is he just kind of weird?
Well, I mean, the thing is, he's just kind of weird, but he also ends the book as, like, their one friend who understands what their deal is and is sort of helping mediate between them and the rest of the world. So,
yeah, I suppose that is true. And yeah, no, he's certainly quite a horny man.
But it does, you're right. There's a lot of ways in which it feels kind of sex negative, including the fact that one of the things that makes the evil sister who gets murdered, who's, somewhat sympathetic in that she too is an abuse victim, but the fact that one of the things that really shows you that she's the bad sister is that she is always wanting to have dalliances.
Well, she is surrounded specifically by quote unquote effeminate young men, which stood out to me because it's like, in a book that is, like, so conscious of not getting screenshotted,
right?
Or that's a problematic turn of phrase right there, and it's used in a negative way.
But the thing is that you may have noticed in a lot of the stuff we read that, like, young men who are femmy in a non-sexy way are really still an appropriate punching bag, because there is still this idea that there's something kind of sinister about a guy who's swishy in the wrong kind of way.
Yeah, I agree completely. Like, it's sort of that, bisexual villainy trope is still somehow alive and well, even in this era of scrupulous correctness. And yeah, no, I think that her whole deal, and also, like, it is her abuse of her sister, even though it's meant to be, explicitly in the text, it's violence. It also has a huge whiff of of CSA about it, like child sexual abuse about it.
Right. Well, and in particular, and again, this is the younger sister by far.
Yes.
And a lot of the ways in which she's sort of acting out do feel like this is a textbook abused child still acting out, which is why I was a little frustrated that everyone was like, well, it's good that you murdered her because, she shouldn't have hurt you.
Yeah, no, the book does the thing where it constructs a
good victim and a bad
relatively
victim.
yeah, no, it does do that, and it also gives us a situation in which, like, no, the only possible thing you could have done at this juncture is to murder this person. You know, even then, I'm not entirely sure that's true. Although, thankfully, I mean, it does make Homily like horribly traumatized by by the
Yes.
by the event at least. But you know, it does. I don't even remember what her name was. Some literary
Some
thing.
literary device. Yes, and again, this book is much better than a lot of the other ones that do this because there are at least some emotional consequences that last beyond the end of the next chapter for all of this stuff.
Yeah, the creation of the scenario in which you have no choice but to murder your abuser is itself a form of wish fulfillment. The author is the one who constructed that closed room.
So I was going to say, so speaking of the abuse thing, though, on the one hand, the mother ending up being the mother coming back to specifically to be like, ha, I didn't love you. I just abandoned you so that I could come back and eat your eggs and gain immortality. That worked very well symbolically. But I didn't, the idea that the thing that, Homily was raised by an abusive mother, but part of the point of the book is supposed to be that, the most monstrous thing isn't the actual monster, it's the abuser. But then the abuser turns out to also be the actual monster. And I really think that ends up undermining a lot of the symbolic weight of the book.
Yeah, no, I'm willing to go there. I think that, like, I would love to have known more about the like the Duchess and her husband before this event happened.
Right.
Because, like, I think in the reading of the book that I want, the Duchess was already an abusive, person. And then, like, this trauma happened to her and that made her worse. Which is a thing that happens.
Well, of course, the trauma that happened to her was she was eaten and her skin was inhabited by a blob monster.
Yeah, but I think that you can construe that as a metaphor for, like, that her husband was killed and that turned her into a monster.
Sure, except again, it doesn't quite work because the book wants Shun's abusive mother and Homily's abusive mother to be the same villain so that they can, neatly be wiped out within one murder.
Agreed. I think that it is a little bit, again, thinking of it as a mystery or, a revenge plot or all of these things, it just falls apart. The focus is on sort of the emotional truth rather than on, the logic of it.
Right, but what I'm saying is that this doesn't work on the emotional truth level because the emotional truth...
I am having to make up a lot of things in order to make it work.
Right, well, and I mean, okay, so you can even kind of see the emotional truth level of, oh, this isn't my mother. This person who I thought I'd formed this, parental bond with is secretly a shape-shifting monster. But I think part of the real horror of coming to grips with one's abusive mother is understanding that despite all this is actually your mother. There's no magical other parent out there who wasn't going to be like this. That on some level it was always going to be like this. And, unless the parent made different choices. And so the fact that the realization of, oh, well, this wasn't your real mother who did all of this to you, I think really does undermine the weight of the book in a way that's really unfortunate because the thing that makes this book good, other than that it's funny and has a lot of little charming character moments, is that, it is in many ways, it is actually a fairly good sort of inside view into an abusive parent-child relationship, into a variety of different abusive parent-child relationships, and one that ends in a very nicely cathartic murder. And so I think it was a really lost, missed opportunity to undermine that message like that.
I'd agree. And I think that I was pretty set to be disappointed in the book before the very end of it.
I think it probably did help that I primed you to to have to go in with low expectations. So the book
you did prime me to go in with low expectations.
So the book is, yes. somewhat benefiting from that, which you're welcome.
Hey, it improved my experience. So there you go.
So, sometimes if I'm not sure whether or not you'll like a book, I generally err on the side of telling you that I'm really not sure you're going to like the book, because, I would rather you be pleasantly surprised than be angrily disappointed.
Well, thank you. That's very considerate of you, and I think it makes for a better podcast
yes.
too. So it really works in all sorts of ways. So I think that So I will in that case pivot to another thing that works for me, or worked for me about this book was that I found Shishishen to be a very sympathetic character and sort of a very familiar character. Like the specific I wish I had no particular shape, thing, or like thinking of oneself as a formless thing, as a sort of an abuse victim. Like that was one of my, childhood fantasies. Like I wanted to be a shapeshifter like Odo from Deep Space Nine.
Yes. Odo.
And like that, and there's a sort of concomitant, discomfort with like the flesh and with fleshly appetites that goes with that.
Yes. And like one of the things, even though I think that the book sometimes goes into too much detail explaining the exact logistics of how she's building this, this human form or that one. It works really well to sort of exaggerate all of her moods, when she's when she's sleepy or depressed, she's just, wouldn't it be nice if you could express the depths of your exhaustion and depression by just like completely melting into a puddle?
Yeah. I mean, I think one of the reasons that I found even that like sort of, the discussions of her internal scaffolding charming is that it had for me the whiff of like a fantasy that had been that had been thought out over a long period of time.
Oh, yes. I just feel like some of that could have been edited. I feel like this is the sort of thing that absolutely goes in the first draft and then really ideally should be edited out before the final draft.
Sure. No, I'll agree with that.
Some of it. I think having some of it initially was great because, it is sort of like, no, I have thought this out. I just didn't think it always needed to be there.
Indeed.
But you do get some good slapstick out of it also.
You do. That is true.
She's like frantically rearranging bones and like being like, okay, I need to do a convincing handshake. Okay, I'm gonna like pull some tiny ribs and
yeah, no,
that also does work as far as like metaphorical way it goes. That a lot of the stuff where she's frantically trying to like assemble herself into something that can look and move vaguely human but is slightly off really felt very relatable as a neurodivergent person of like, okay, I gotta like squish myself in and look at me. I'm making eye contact and I'm extending my hand in the right way. My bones are absolutely correctly aligned, right? Absolutely.
Yeah. And it's trans stuff too. It's like, I have like, there is some alchemy that is going to make me look like a human woman specifically.
Yes. It's also full of gender, which is great.
Right, and I have to, keep that up at all times. I have to really pay attention to how my hat is being glued on, or else I'm not going to be able to maintain this charade. But the other part of that is that I related to Shishishin in a number of levels. One of them is like, okay, you are very much conscious of your own capacity to harm, and your own anger and your own sort of violence, and you are, and like, so you're scanning around for people, and like, who does she immediately fall in love with? Like the world's most abuse victim.
Right.
It's like the sort of, oh, I recognize that, you are somebody to build a nest in because you are somebody who will destroy yourself for the convenience of a monster.
Yes.
So I'm making a beeline toward her. And like her sort of, that recognizing that, and then her sort of understanding that and trying to see what kind of relationship could still exist without that immediate, that immediate sort of pre-conscious attraction. And then, sort of trying to say, well, okay, without that problematic or harmful or, I can't remember the word that I'm looking for. Unfortunately, I don't have 100% command of the right therapy words for this sort of thing.
Right.
But that bad thing, is there still a relationship here without that bad thing? And it turns out there is. I like that a lot.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. And in general, the ways in which it did, the ways in which this sort of therapy speak relationship between them evolved nicely was that it is a good story of somebody who's very aware of their capacity to hurt and feels entitled to do so all the time.
Yes.
Bullies learn to recognize kids who can be bullied, and that's a talent that they take into their adult lives. This can lead to some pretty fascinating friendships, and you might be in one yourself.
Like, then having to struggle to not hurt somebody because it would just be too easy to hurt them irreparably, and she wants to maintain a relationship with them. And that, like, watching her sort of struggle and flail towards doing that, I would have liked to actually see her have to work a little bit harder at it. But in general, I think that's one of the sort of emotional cores of the book that really did win me over.
That is true. Although, again, in retrospect, I do wish that the thing that she has to struggle mightily to stop herself doing wasn't quite so sexually coded. Because it's the violence of it rather than sort of the reproductive aspect that's really sort of at issue here.
Right. But also, I think you're right that she should have absolutely had to have the conversation of, so I'm going to lay my eggs in you. And sort of resetting her expectations that way instead of doing all of the work, internally.
In the abstract.
In the
exactly.
abstract, being like, wait,
revelations.
But I don't want to hurt her. Which, like, it's good for her to slowly have those revelations, but the fact that this meant that that her relationship with Homily was basically never at any risk, because by the time she's been revealed as the monster, she has never done a single thing to harm Homily or even make Homily feel threatened.
Yeah.
It meant that, again, it felt like the book wasn't 100% willing to commit to its premise.
I agree. I wish there had been some of that. And that would also set up the ending better, honestly, because part of the ending is that Homily listens to, Shisheshin has been using her therapy speak on Homily this whole time to try to convince her to stand up for herself and to not be a doormat and to, not let other people's need, override her own sense of self and that kind of stuff. And at the end of the book, Shisheshin uses exactly the same therapy speak on Homily, and Homily's like, no, actually, I think that's bullshit in this case.
Right.
And it's I would have liked to have seen her develop herself in relation to, we do get it at the very end.
But she sort of jumps straight to it, and it's only to protect a child. We never really get to see her develop these skills for her own sake.
Exactly. It does seem a little bit out of nowhere. But on the other hand, I think this is the first, narcissistic parents of monstrous children book in which we've actually seen a positive representation of how you might be a parent. Well, I guess the witch, the Heart of the Witch, did this also to a certain extent, but or the Witch's Heart. But I think that I really liked. A, it's a funny fake out, but B, the scene where Homily and Epilogue are playing, I'm eating you.
Right. Yes, that was really cute.
That felt very cute and also very good ways to deal with weird, bad behavior and urges and feelings. And
right. It's okay, so this kid, this little blob child has this need to eat, to feel like it's eating living people. So I'm just going to dip my hand in meat, and then you can hoover it all up off my hand. Right. The way that Homily interacted with Epilogue was really sweet. And, but it almost felt like it was getting us back to the beginning with the sort of really leaning into the creepy humor monstrousness part, while also being sort of fundamentally good-natured and charming.
Yes, I agree. And I think that, like, you say that, the Shoshin, is like, okay, I'm dumping this child on you and going to hibernate now. But I think that the hibernation, and particularly at the end there, felt really like, it was like, this is seasonal depression,
Right.
but more so it's depression, and it's like, it's happening earlier than usual because you're under way more stress than usual.
Right. But the thing is that, okay, so dumping your child on your new girlfriend so that you can go off and be seasonally depressed is not necessarily a happy ending.
I don't think the book thinks that it's good.
Okay, I was not sure, but I'm willing to buy your read on it in this case. That it's like, okay, no, this was not actually responsible parenting on your part, Shishishan, except that honestly, getting yourself out of the way so that the child can have better parenting for a season is maybe actually fine.
It's like, no, Shoshin I think that Shoshin is an awful parent, and the book knows this.
Uh-huh.
Like, from the very beginning where she accidentally makes a child and then abandons it.
Yes.
It's like, I think that, I mean, and it makes sense that Shoshin would be an awful parent. Shoshin was not parented at all and has no,
Of course, neither was Homily. I mean, Homily didn't have any good parental role models.
Again, we don't know what the Duchess was like. I mean, she was a Duchess, which means she was probably, a relatively awful person.
That's fair.
But...
Presumably whatever servants actually raised them gave Homily some idea of...
The book does make a point that, like, the children who sort of were younger after the monster ate the Duchess and replaced her are much more fucked than Homily is, because Homily was actually raised by the pre-monstering Homily Duchess,
right.
which actually works with your point
right.
about how this is about how that's incoherent, but it does, that is sort of in the text, unfortunately.
Right. On the other hand, like, it makes the plot work better, but it makes the metaphor work worse, and you're not reading this book for the plot.
Right, exactly.
But also, Homily, unlike the others, has, like, left the family for periods of time to, like, go off and do her own thing, and has presumably been, at least had the chance to observe healthier relationships happening, so, which Shishishan really hasn't.
Actually, that does lead me to another thing that I like about the book, which is, like, and something that I haven't seen addressed a whole lot in the books that we've read so far, which is, even with all of the, like, horrible parents that we've had, is sibling dynamics in abusive families.
Yeah.
Because it's like the one who left and is, like, black sheeped to the nth degree, right?
Right.
The one who left is monstered by the mom, and the rest of the family, like, enthusiastically takes her up on that because that means that it's not them.
Yep.
Yeah,
no, I thought that was really well depicted. I guess I just...
Now, I don't know if murder is necessarily the best
it's not even the murder. It's just that I would have liked to see the narrative, It's not like I think that everyone needs a redemption arc or anything. I just would have liked to see the idea that the other abused children's lives mattered a little bit more. Because even though they're the wrong kind of victim, the one who isn't able to get away and thus internalizes a lot of the bad stuff and acts out in the wrong kind of ways, including sexually.
Mm-hmm.
I just, I would have liked to see their lives be treated as more important. Like, because even a lot of Homily's trauma seemed more to be about, like, what this says about herself. That, she can murder her sister.
I concur. And yeah, I think that there is a sort of thing with, Homily's little sister. And again, it says something that I can't remember her name, but, like, her effeminate young men and her short haircut and her, and her sexual acting out and all this is like, you're painting a picture, like a negative picture here, and then you're killing the person. You're making a stereotype out of this person and then you're killing them.
Right.
And, it seems to me to be congruent with the sort of discomfort around sex that permeates a lot of the rest of the book's imagery as well. And that's one of the only things that left a bad taste in my mouth.
I mean, I'm highly, extremely in favor of reading asexual romances. But like, you look at Murderbot and there's tons of sex going on in the Murderbot books. You just don't hear about it because Murderbot would rather like throw itself on a grenade than hear about anybody's sex lives. But you can tell that everyone else is having lots of sex and like soap opera dramas, and it never makes them look like bad people. If anything, it's,
Yes.
a chance to show that, like, to show what a genuinely nice guy Rati is the tiny bits and pieces you see of some of his romantic entanglements where it's like, oh, he really is trying to consistently be the ethical person here.
Yeah, no, I think that it's certainly possible to do, stories about ace characters and even like ace relationships and ace romances without.
That don't end up being a little bit like slut-shamey and, well, maybe they deserve to die.
Yes, agreed. But what the last thing that I was going to say was that, and the thing that I appreciated about the book is that I really did enjoy the fact that the poison is rosemary. And the only reason that I say this, and I don't even hate rosemary.
Right, like, I love rosemary, but okay, so I'm really interested to see where you're going with this.
Well, I'm a mailman, and a thing that
Okay, now I'm really interested to see where you're going with this.
people tend to plant rosemary bushes and then not prune them. And then sometimes you have to push your way through rosemary bushes to get to their mailboxes. And then you've been seasoned, and you're like seasoned for the rest of the day. And even if you like rosemary, you just smell like rosemary.
All right, so attention,
it's a little much.
Attention, listeners, please spare your friendly neighborhood mail carrier the suffering, and make sure that your aromatic plants are not blocking the way to your mailbox.
Thank you. I appreciate it. That's a fine PSA. Really, any plants, plants with thorns, obviously, but you can't even like brush the rosemary aside because it'll just do the same thing to you. You're going to be smelling like a nice roast for the rest of the day. But yeah, that's all.
Yeah, no, it's
This is the maximally self-indulgent jingle, which is almost a tautology in and of itself. But if you usually enter your house by a method that doesn't take you through your front door or otherwise past where your mailbox or mail slot is located, consider that somebody else has to make that trip every day and maintain your access accordingly. Make sure your steps aren't rotten or covered with slime. Prune your plants. Imagine that someone a foot taller than you might have to pass through your space. Not to mention your dog. This is a losing battle, I'm aware of that, but just try to think of it for a little bit.
So next, do you have any final points before we wrap this one up?
No, I feel like that we've done a pretty good. I feel like we've done a pretty good job wrapping this one. Oh, actually, I will say that this is one of the reasons why this is a good narcissistic parents story is that it does not go the book eater's route of saying that, well, clearly a good parent of a monstrous child just enables everything without actually trying to raise the child in any way, because just enables everything and gives into her martyr complex, but also it comes down against both enabling your child doing harm and also against killing your child, and that is unfortunately and depressingly, when it comes to how to treat neurodivergent children, a remarkably progressive standpoint.
Agreed. And it also makes the point that you may be the monstrous child, but if you end up having kids, you might end up being the narcissistic parent yourself.
Yes,
so
and that was well handled.
At some point in this process, you need to figure out what exactly it is you're going to do, and even if you have a child accidentally by carving out a lump of yourself and leaving it in a room,
this spare meat.
You are, which actually is a kind of a nice mirror of her mom,
right,
making hers as like spare egg sac. She made this critter as like spare meat, but But yeah, no, you should probably come to terms with, how you would raise a child if you were ever somehow accidentally or intentionally in the process of doing it, and just doing the complete opposite of what your parents did is probably not going to work.
Right,
So-
as it turns out. Oh, actually, there was one other thing that I did like about this book, which is that I felt like was very well depicted, is that it is also a good example of how, when, you've come out of an abusive background and you're really not sure how to form healthy relationships, one of the ways that you can learn is by practicing loving communication with your pets. Because that is definitely part of how Shishashan learns to form a relationship that isn't entirely predatory. Is she has this pet bear.
That is good. I was sort of wondering what's Blueberry doing here, and I think that besides being Blueberry, because that's a funny
Right.
joke. And yeah, no, I think that I would have missed that, and you being a conscientious pet parent didn't. So.
All right.
But yes.
I think we've dissected this one pretty thoroughly.
Indeed, we have. So next time we will be discussing another book that has a lot of therapy language for reasons which are well explained in the plot, and also a lot of violence committed by people who are really good at talking therapy language.
I would not call this next book a cozy in any way, though.
It's certainly not. It's an incredibly angry book, and we will discuss it on those terms. And that's Those Outside
Those
the Wall.
Beyond the Wall.
The sequel to Those Beyond the Wall. Thank you. The sequel to The Space Between Worlds.
Yes.
It's not Wizles, but we talked about the original, and it's interesting. So
And you know what? The thing is, it does have lesbians, and it does have a wizard, so...
Yes.
I'm counting.
But it is not about them. They're supporting characters. However,
Well, I mean, we also did include the Saint of Bright Doors, so...
No, you've got me there.
Under the Saint of Bright Doors
yes.
rule, we are including it. Also, it's a sequel to a book that we already included, and I think it's good and worth discussing, so...
Agreed. So we'll get onto that. But until next time...
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
The perceptive among you will have noticed that there are in fact no rules, except that we cover what we want to cover. But we like to pretend otherwise, because it's more fun that way.